Back in 1966, 6 years after independence, political power struggle and intrigues reached boiling point in Nigeria, leading to the first military coup d'etat. Shortly after the first coup, there came the second and most brutal of all, codenamed Operation Araba. While the first coup was said to be targeted at corrupt politicians, Operation Araba was a revenge coup against the perpetrators of the first and the northern officers' plan to secede from Nigeria. In this edition of Hispu Media, we explain Operation Araba, the operation in which northern military faction planned to break the region away from Nigeria. Please come with me, Gabriel here. More than half a century ago, Nigerian army officers from the northern region unleashed a wave of brutal assassinations, summary execution, and horrific torture on its soldiers from the eastern region of the country. These happened across military barracks, temporary roadblocks, transportation hubs, and even malls in the country. In the process, Major General J.T.U. Aguiyi, the head of state and supreme commander, was kidnapped by junior officers and killed while on a visit to the city of Ibadan. He was killed along with Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekunle Fajuyi, the military governor of the western region, who hosted him in Ibadan. This orgy of violence came to be known as the July counter-coup or the July mutiny. But at the instance, it was codenamed Operation Araba, a Hausa word which means let's separate. Interestingly, Operation Araba was not driven by any form of ideology. It was, however, motivated by revenge and outright tribalism. Northern officers were avenging the killing of their officers and politicians during the January coup d'etat. The January coup, which saw the brutal murder of officers and politicians from the north and a few from the west, was seen as targeting at the northern region. It was also seen as Igbo agenda to dominate. Meanwhile, on one occasion, long before Operation Araba was launched, Murtala Muhammed was said to have called Aguiyi a fool in the presence of other officers and threatened to avenge the death of his northern officer colleagues. Arguably, his position as inspector of signal became quite veritable for the planning of the revenge coup. The mutineers led by Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Muhammed, T.Y. Danjuma, Martins Adamu, and others intended to carry out revenge on fellow soldiers from the then eastern region, primarily of Igbo ethnicity, before withdrawing to the northern region where the majority of the rebels originated. Murtala Muhammed and his northern colleagues had totally lost confidence in the Nigerian Federation and had plans to break northern region from Nigeria. Interestingly, this may not have been the first time that the northern region was having issues with the Nigerian Federation. While this particular problem was specific to the army, the first issue was way back in 1953 when northern politicians pulled out of the federal parliament after the crisis that followed their rejection of Anthony Nahoro's motion for Nigeria's independence in 1956. The northern politicians produced an 8-point demand which effectively wanted a confederal Nigeria as a precondition to return. Meanwhile, as their coup began on July 29, 1966, it was Murtala Muhammed who coordinated the takeover of the international airport in Lagos. But by strike of fate, the international airport would be named after him 10 years later when he himself was killed in a coup attempt led by Lieutenant Colonel Bukar Suka Dimka of the Nigerian Army. When Murtala Muhammed and his troops arrived at the airport, they hijacked planes to ferry their families back to the north as a prelude to the exit of the region from Nigeria. While at the airport, Captain Okoye, an Igbo officer, was captured and tied to an iron cross and beaten to death. In military units across Lagos, Kaduna and Ibadan, northern troops went wild and murdered their Igbo colleagues in gruesome manner, eliminating hundreds of them. But the arrowhead of the whole operation was Murtala Muhammed, who had close links with the Northern People's Congress as his uncle Inu Awada was a defense minister. But wait, kindly take a moment to book the like button on this video and subscribe to Hispu Media if you have not done so already. Thank you. Meanwhile, as Danjuma and others arrived in Ibadan, and made for the government house, there was a detachment of the 106th Artillery Battalion commanded by William Welby from Plateau State on guard. This is where Ironsi was seized along with his host Adekunle Fajuyi, who decided to follow his guest. But it later came to light that Welby was part of the plot and would later become ADC to go on. They pushed them into a Land Rover and drove them to Lulipon on Iwo Road, where the two were shot dead. It has been alleged that the lethal bullet was fired by one Sergeant Tijani. When the killings were done with, senior northern officers converged at the Ikeja cantonment in Lagos. At this time, Murtala Muhammed and his boys wore a terrifying look and was ready to devour anyone that challenged them. As fear grips everyone, the most senior surviving officer, Brigadier Ogundipe, could not face the boys given their mood. Instead, he sent the Chief of Staff Army, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, to mediate. However, 28-year-old Murtala Muhammed insisted that northern troops should destroy Lagos, pull out to the north and secede. Meanwhile, when the military governor of the eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, managed to reach Ogundipe, he was informed that northern troops had stated their condition for a ceasefire. The conditions were said to include 1. The repatriation of northerners and southerners to their respective regions, and 2. The secession of northern region from Nigeria. But Ojukwu's response was, quote, "Let them go if that is what they want." He later urged Ogundipe to take charge since Ironsi's whereabouts was unknown and promised to make a broadcast 30 minutes after Ogundipe in support. But northern officers were no longer in the mood for a southern rule. This became clear to Ogundipe when a northern sergeant told him, quote, "I do not take orders from you until my northern captain comes." Another northern private equally refused to obey orders from the military governor of Lagos State, Major Mobolabji Johnson. When Gowon assessed the mood of his northern colleagues, he contacted the Chief of Police Special Branch, Alhaji M.D. Yusuf, and informed him that the northern soldiers had written a speech declaring the northern region secession from Nigeria. The speech was influenced by Murtala Muhammed and Major Martins Adamu. However, the soldiers were discouraged by a northern judge, Justice Bello, who happened to be in Lagos at the time. He informed them of the difficulty in seceding from Nigeria when the CBN is in Lagos. After 3 days of intense negotiation to stop the secession, Northern Army faction in control of Nigeria's capital city, Lagos, were joined by the British and American ambassador, Sir Francis Cumming Bruce and Herbert Matthews, respectively. Among other civilians with them were 2 northern judges, the head of the civil service of the northern region, Alhaji Ali Akilu, Mukhtar Tahir, Chief Justice Adetukumbo Ademola, Mr. Justice Bello, the chairman of the Police Service Commission, Alhaji Sule Katagum. Some permanent secretaries such as Alhaji Musa Dagash, Abdulaziz Atta, Yusuf Gobea, Ali Sinayida, Ibrahim Damsida were also with them. The Nigerian police were represented by the Inspector General of Police, Alhaji Kamsalim, and the head of Police Special Branch, MD Yusuf. For about 3 days, these people argued for the survival of Nigeria. While the northern soldiers tried to secede, northern civilians tried to convince them that secession was not in the interest of the north. This became a serious dilemma as a coup was planned with no other agenda other than revenge against the Igbos and secession. After about 3 days of intense negotiation and with the country without a government for the 3 days, the secession idea was dropped, but the northern soldiers gave a condition that only the most senior officer among them must take charge of the country. With this condition, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a 32-year-old Christian from the minority group in Nigeria's Middle Belt, took command of the army and the rest of the country, of course, with the exception of the eastern region. But I will come back to that in a moment. Despite the presence of senior officers from the south such as Brigadier Ogundipe, Commodore Ware, Colonel Robert Adeboyo, Lieutenant Colonel Nwao, Imo Korubu, Philip Effiong, Njoku and several others who were commissioned before Gowon, he was appointed head of state. But This created another problem. Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, the governor of the eastern region, refused to accept Gowon's authority. This, along with other factors, who set the stage for a clash that resulted in the formation of the insurgent Republic of Biafra and a civil war that lasted until the beginning of 1970. It is safe to conclude that July 29, 1966 was a day of tragedy on many levels. This day saw the outbreak of an uncontrollable bloodlust which claimed the lives of several soldiers and also moved intertribal rivalry from the political arena to the army, an institution that until that time was neutral. Interestingly, every section of this country has at one point or the other wanted out of the Union. While it is necessary to learn from history, Nigeria as a nation cannot continue to dwell in the past. The problem of ethnicity and tribalism, selfish interest, corruption and nepotism must be fixed if Nigeria must move beyond her sorry state. We must begin to forge a strong position forward in order to build a viable nation that we all should be proud of. For now though, the search for Nigeria's path to nationhood continues. Click the video displayed here for a full story of how Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa were killed during the January 1966 coup. And for more stories like this, kindly like this one and subscribe to Hispo Media so that the algorithm can push this video to more people. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.